Hi, I'm James from Chaosium. I sat down with David Larkins, the line editor for Pendragon, and we talked about downtime in tabletop role-playing games. Pendragon has a pretty advanced downtime system. It's a big part of the game, and David wanted to share some advice on how you could best use downtime in Pendragon, but also in TTRPGs more broadly. I'll jump across to that interview in just a moment, but first, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. It really helps us out. Thanks for watching.
So I would define downtime as, well, obviously, there's an implication there. It's the activities that occur outside of what we would traditionally call the adventure or the scenario. So you have your classic scenario structure of we have a problem, let's go solve the problem solved. Now, you can just go straight from one to the next. That's perfectly fine, but downtime is a way of handling the game in a different aspect where in between those adventures, you spend some time either live with your group, or some people might do it, through a Discord server or messaging, group chat, whatever, where you're sort of working out what is going on. Like there's an assumption that time is passing between the adventures. So what is going on during that time?
Do you see downtime as something that is distinct from regular play, or is it just another part of regular play?
It's really funny you ask me that because, so in Pendragon, of course, you have the winter phase, which is one of its most well-known mechanics, I think, for people who have played it. And that is downtime. This is a debate that I kind of tease my wife about, actually, because in the past, we'd be doing winter phase at the table with our group, and we'd be kind of wrapping that up, and she'd say something like, all right, let's play. And I'd say, oh, we've been playing this whole time, It is play, and it is on the same level as your traditional adventure structure.
You've alluded a little bit to how Pendragon has the winter phase, and it is a game that uses downtime in a pretty big way. Can you give us just an overview of how downtime is approached by Pendragon?
This is something that we also find in RuneQuest, Adventures in Glorantha, which is definitely taken from winter phase. And even in Call of Cthulhu, if you're having kind of an extended period to recover your sanity or what have you. but yeah, in Pendragon specifically, there's a multi-step process you go through. So it's like, okay, everybody, well, first of all, and this is actually one of my favorite things about Pendragon, is the solo scenario. So this is mostly used if a player couldn't make it to the previous session, they missed the adventure. There's a solo scenario that they can play through really fast. It's just a series of dice rolls, and it's going to just kind of very quickly determine, okay, well, what was that player knight up to that they weren't off on this quest with the other knights this time. So that's really cool. And that's a great use of downtime mechanics in general, is a way to explain a missing player character, right? I like to say that Pendragon's pretty absentee player proof because there's no guilt, right? It's like, oh, they missed out on the experience or whatever. Well, yeah, but they're going to get some back. It won't be as much. They won't get as many skill checks. They won't get as much glory, but they'll get something. And it kind of explains what they were up to, too. So it works narratively. But other things you do in the winter phase, of course, you do your experience checks, work just the same as they do in Call of Cthulhu and RuneQuest. You see if any of your skills, traits, or passions increased from use in the previous year. You check your economic circumstances. So, every player knight exists in the larger world and has to be supported in some way. So that can be either by a lord if they're a household knight, or by their estate if they are a vassal knight. And so you check that, and it can be, usually it's okay. Usually everything's good. But if there's a lot of disruption that year from war or plague and pestilence or whatever, You might have a shortage that you have to make up for, so you have to figure that out. You check for whether your favorite warhorse survived the year. You check to see how your family's doing. If you're married, if you have a wife, did she have a child, or whatever? Have your children survived the year? The stakes are pretty high, honestly, with the winter phase. There can be some really dramatic turns of events in the winter phase. Yeah, and then you hand out the glory totals, which is always fun. It's always a nice way to cap it off. And yeah, so it's like I say, it's kind of a step-by-step process you work through. And by the end of it, your character's a little older, a little wiser, maybe a little more decrepit if they're getting old, but it's a whole other issue. Like I say, it can be something that you can knock out really fast, but I've also had winter phases where you're also checking for family events. Are things going on with the family? Did your uncle get accused of witchcraft or something like that? These can generate adventures in and of themselves. And sometimes you're resolving that really quickly during the winter phase. Other times you're working it into the next year's scenario.
I hate it whenever my uncle's accused of witchcraft. Totally ruins the winter phase.
Happens way too often. Yeah, very awkward.
So what is it about Pendragon specifically that makes a focus on winter phases and downtime so important?
Without the winter phase, you would have a tendency to just have one adventure after another. A lot of adventure games are like that. Sometimes I think that is appropriate for the genre that you're playing in. But with Pendragon, the winter phase creates this sense of time passing. It forces everybody at the table to take a moment, really, and just acknowledge time is passing. You erase your character's age and rewrite it in 1 year older. Same with your squire. Squires get old enough to get knighted and they move off. You get a new squire. Your children grow up and eventually become knights themselves or other positions of nobility. Without that, we don't have that sense of time passing, which is really a big part of the Arthurian story, right? Because the Arthurian arc very much takes place in the sense of time passing. Arthur starts out as the boy king, and then he matures, and then he gets older, and then he's this sick and weak king who has to be restored by the Grail. His son Mordred is a child who then matures and grows up and betrays him. Lancelot and Guinevere's affair takes place over many, many years. You have to have that sense of time passing, really. And it's really what kind of, in my opinion, elevates the game in a lot of ways, because it infuses it with this sense of sort of epic grandeur.
Is there another type of storytelling framework or system that you think is also particularly suited to downtime that doesn't have that kind of same historical or generational aspect? I know that some games like Blades in the Dark, which are set in pretty distinct time periods, use downtime a lot in their rules.
Yeah, for sure. Like, for instance, in RuneQuest, you do your seasonal phase. You don't do a winter phase. So you're doing 4 of those a year rather than 1 a year like in Pendragon. So by varying downtime in a game, you can make an adjustment for what the game is expecting. We've talked about multi-generational games before. Obviously, a yearly winter phase really promotes that. But I'm a big fan of it, even in like a more classic kind of fantasy adventure game, like in a D&D game or something. It's actually something of a pet peeve of mine. If I'm playing D&D, to have a character start at level 1 and then within like 2 months they're level 5 or whatever. I want to feel a little bit more time passing there to just reflect like this is a hard-earned progression. So I think you can really work downtime into pretty much any game you want, and you can fine-tune it in terms of how often it happens, how long we're talking about. Is maybe, downtime can just be a month or 3 months or something, right? So it's mostly useful if it doesn't necessarily have to be epic, right? It's mostly useful if you want to just promote this feeling of growth going on with both the characters and the game world as well.
So what kind of story would you not use downtime for?
Any kind of like really fast-paced, frenetic game. Like obviously like a pulp adventure genre. you can just go boom, 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 one adventure after another. You just don't stop. Or even if there's time passing, you're not necessarily running downtime mechanics, right? So like think about Indiana Jones movies, like it'll always show you the year at the beginning of the movie, and there might be like 4 years in between the last movie and this one, but Indy's still basically the same guy. He's not really changed in any like marked way. That's same goes for like a superhero game. Superheroes don't tend to change very much over time, you know, mostly. But yeah, I mean, if you want those kind of iconic characters, and you want a sense of sort of timelessness, Superman's always going to be Superman, right? Or whatever. Then yeah, you don't really need your downtime mechanic.
Do you have any tips for GMs who are going to be putting downtime mechanics into their games on how to make it smoother, how to introduce it to players, and how to keep everyone engaged and excited?
Yeah, well, I think it should definitely be more than just a simple bookkeeping exercise. And so if you can figure out a way to introduce some interesting narrative developments or stakes, for instance, like if you're using your downtime mechanics to track training and development of things, maybe one of the characters is an author who's working on a book, so you're going to make some dice rolls to see how that's progressing. Maybe they finished their book since the last adventure. Maybe it's trash. Maybe they fumbled their roll and they realize, oh, I got to start over. So if you can have some stakes or some random events worked in with your downtime mechanics, it's going to really engage your players and generate more stories going forward.
How do you feel about downtime mechanics that will pull in really, really dramatic changes to a story? I know some systems where you can die during downtime without so much as, a cool scene to go with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit extreme, obviously. And that's something you definitely want buy-in from your group if you're going to do that. And I think that does fit with a genre or a game that it's just going to be assumed that characters are fairly disposable, and you're probably going to be making multiple characters over time. I mean, technically it can kind of happen in Pendragon because you're aging every year, and once you're past the age of 35, you start making aging rolls and your stats start going down, and so eventually you do reach a point where you need to retire, or sometimes your knight does actually not make it through the winter. Now this is usually happening well into this knight's career, right? So it's not like you're losing someone that you just started playing, and it's not really a surprise, right? It's like, well, he was getting up there, so and in fact he might even be more or less a backup character by that point anyway. But yeah, again, it's like, I think it has its place, but you just want to make sure everyone's aware of, that's a possibility. You don't want to catch somebody by surprise.
What's the best experience you had so we can crystallize that as the way that, we should be aiming for downtime to go?
So the best downtime experience I had was in a Pendragon game I was running a long time ago. Actually, I think it was the first Pendragon game I ever ran. And we were doing winter phase, and I'm gonna get a little spicy here, but like one of the characters had an affair with a queen that of a kingdom that they were visiting, and he had just had this affair and gone on about his life. And so I just rolled to see if she was gonna have his child or not, and it came up positive. So during the winter phase, I had her show up basically and just be like, hey, hello, I'm having your baby. And he absolutely freaked out. But then mostly from surprise, it's like, what? Like this was, we were all new to the game, right? So didn't quite realize like, oh, those were the stakes, right? And it just totally blew his mind. And then it created this complete character turn where he then became like this loyal subject of hers, which was to the detriment of the rest of the group because she was kind of a villain, right? She did not have their best interests at heart, right? And then that led to another winter phase situation where that player knight had challenged a fellow player knight to a duel, which ended up getting played out during the winter phase, with the queen looking on, and the player knight just, chose to sacrifice himself rather than kill his friend. It was super dramatic. We've had some really dramatic moments in our winter phases over the over the years.